Bitcoin appears on track to end the third quarter lower. Joining us now to discuss the crypto markets is Coinbase Institutional Head of Research, David Duong. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, thanks, Jen.
All right, let's talk about these markets. There seems to be a whole lot of nothing going on for the last many weeks. What are you watching?
Yeah, I think people are generally kind of misinterpreting the sequence of events here. Many people are kind of overestimating the importance of macro and what's going on with the Fed. But honestly, those are the best of what happened, and it's really not what's going to be relevant going forward. I mean, in our space in particular, of course, many people are watching the catalysts, and they're pretty well known at this point with regard to the Bitcoin spot ETF, with regard to the regulatory environment. But what I think people are missing is that things are changing at the moment. I mean, just in the background, we have this looming government shutdown. It's probably going to happen October 1st. All things being equal, I actually think that should be Bitcoin supportive, because Bitcoin, as I've mentioned before on this show, it's an alternative to the traditional financial system and will be treated as such, but it's still going to take that little bit of volatility first, because I think all risk assets, and I don't necessarily always categorize Bitcoin in that, but it's going to be impacted at first until people realize, oh yeah, actually crypto is actually where things are going to gravitate towards, because it's a good hedge for this kind of stuff. Also, in the meantime, of course, Chair Powell wants to keep talking about how the economy is doing so well, and therefore the need to maintain this, this hawkish kind of tone, this higher for longer kind of stance. Meanwhile, we've got an auto worker strike going on. That's clearly going to hit the economy in Q3. That should dampen the Fed's strong GDP outlook. Plus, credit markets just don't look that healthy. Loan delinquencies are rising. We are going to have the student loan repayments coming back in October. So I think all these things are going to hit around the same time, and we're going to start moving back towards that, kind of dovish outlook later.
Paint a picture for me. Say the government does shut down when folks are expecting it to. What do the crypto markets look like?
So I think at first, I've kind of said this for quite a while now, my view has been that Q3, and this is going to be inclusive of probably the next 2, maybe 3 weeks. I think things are going to be choppy still, just because it's not purely based on a macro view. I also base it on just where the technicals are at. I think that a lot of the shorts had been liquidated, for example, or they were kind of removed. So this is kind of where we are. And this is kind of why we've been so kind of range bound as far as crypto is concerned. But the shutdown, risk markets aren't going to be happy. And by that, I mean equities. Crypto is going to be affected by that. But keep in mind that the correlations between crypto and stocks has been fairly low. It's almost been pretty much no relationship at this point. So I think at first people are going to say, you know what, just everything's going to sell off and it's just going to be negative. But then I think probably within the first week or maybe into the second week, people are going to start buying into Bitcoin in particular and maybe crypto as a whole, because they're going to recognize that the world, in fact, is transitioning in terms of the trading regime.
On Friday, 117,000 Bitcoin options contracts and 1.1 million ETH options contracts are going to expire on Deribit. Do you expect prices to remain stable ahead of this, or what do you expect to see?
So the max pain points on those contracts are a little bit lower than where I kind of see the current ceiling for Bitcoin and ETH. I think that right now, the 200-day moving average actually acts as a better kind of, top side for these things. But, my guess is probably there's going to be a pretty big transition after those contracts expire. And, some people are kind of pointing to, JP Morgan's kind of comments on the ETH market. Some people are kind of saying, yeah, but, there's now this kind of scandal happening in Hong Kong. How are these things kind of impacting the market? And they're relevant. Don't get me wrong. To the former, I see the JP Morgan story kind of as a bit of a reverse indicator. because I think it's not really paying attention as much to the pure technicals of the situation, even though it's trying to kind of capitalize on the fundamentals somewhat. But I think that going into this, what's going to matter as we get into October is the timeline of the next FOMC, what's happening with regards to resolutions as far as these auto worker strikes. And then I think that the market will suspect that after trading risk off for a little bit, into the meeting with the Fed, they're going to recognize that the Fed's not going to hike. They're going to just keep monitoring the situation, and that's going to set us up for a nice rally.
All right. What other tokens are you watching? We talked so much about Bitcoin and Ether in this segment on this show. Anything else you're watching?
Well, I think with the altcoin space right now, a lot of it has to do with what's happening with the FTX liquidations. Clearly, I hope people recognize now that there's going to be a lot of mitigating circumstances surrounding that. In part, there's going to be capped weekly sales. So the court has approved that it could be up to $200 million a week. But at the moment, it seems like it's only going to be $50 million in the first phase and $100 million. And only unless they get approval from the two committees will they then increase that size permanently to $200 million. But also you have to realize that a lot of these tokens are just locked up. For example, Solana, Sol tokens are going to be locked up until 2025 to 2027. You also have the fact that they can actually hedge a lot of these sales. So I think probably the asset recovery efforts are taking kind of center stage at this point. I think that's happening because we're quickly approaching the trial. But the big question is what they're going to be able to recover. And until people kind of reckon with that, I think that's just kind of keeping some of the buy side pressure on altcoins a little bit muted at the moment.
David, any thoughts on the NFT markets? We had some data come out last week that said 95% of NFTs are now worth almost nothing. Any thoughts on NFTs and how we might see them progress moving forward, especially when it comes to the institutional adoption of NFTs?
So I don't look as closely at the NFT market. I tend to look at more of the liquid tokens. But I will say that what we're seeing in terms of activity on OpenSea, for example, has just been a very, pretty sharp decline. It's hard to say what's going to kind of motivate the space. I think gaming is probably the biggest opportunity. So I think probably that theme, I was at Singapore for Token 2049, for example. I think that's much more prominent overseas in Asia than it is in the United States. Over there, they're working on, trying to get games and trying to incorporate NFTs into that. And so maybe that's going to be the next part of that cycle. But for the time being, I agree. It's a fairly depressed market there.
David, thanks so much for joining us this morning and giving us that markets update on a Monday.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Coinbase Institutional Head of Research, David Duong.